Well, great kickoff. And Lucy talked about data and interrogating the data at the very beginning in supply chain, which is a terrific segue into Darryl. And I love your case study of Barangaroo, Darryl. So please take us through it.
Thanks very much, Ross. I'll just get my presentation up quickly. Okay, so I guess a lot of the discussion that Lucy and points that Lucy raised resonated very strongly with me in terms of some of the challenges that we had in the early days on Barangaroo. I do want to talk, I guess I'll focus a little bit more around the supply chain management side rather than the front end design. Yeah, I'll step through that. In terms of Barangaroo, just for those who aren't familiar with Barangaroo.
Darryl, can you go full screen, please, mate?
Oh, of course, sorry.
Thank you.
How's that?
Good.
So yeah, for those that I guess are unfamiliar with Barangaroo South Precinct, development's located on the western fringe of the Sydney CBD. It's a mixed use precinct, so residential, retail, commercial, and there's about 13 individual buildings, and the final 3 buildings are actually in the process of being delivered as we speak. I guess as part of our initial bid to develop the site, we set, I guess, a number of really ambitious sustainability goals at the time. One of them was around a commitment to reduce the embodied carbon by 20% against standard construction practice. And the embodied carbon commitment also needed to be demonstrated within each building portion, if you like, or works portion. And so you know, in some ways, it's amazing to see how far we've come as an industry. Sometimes it feels like we're only limping along, but if you think back to sort of 2009 when we started on the journey, we didn't really have a clear definition of what embodied carbon was when we made the commitment. We didn't really have, we had the ISO standards, but we didn't have things like EN 15978. We didn't have the RICS standards. We had, you could probably count the number of EPDs for building products that we may have used on buildings on, you know, one hand almost. And so in those early days, we really had to try and start to work from a blank sheet of paper with some of that and start to identify how we would actually set a baseline position, how would we start to model the embodied carbon and define the boundaries as well. So I'll just step forward into just providing a bit of an overview in terms of our approach. So there's many aspects to kind of how we approach the challenge. But like I said, I'm really going to focus more on the touch points in the process around how we engage our supply chain in particular to help us deliver on the target, because without the supply chain, it's, you know, impossible. So I guess the key things and some of the points that Lucy raised around baseline establishment were really critical for us early. But off the back of sort of landing that measurement approach and drawing the line in the sand at that kind of early stage of design, we're able to set up roadmaps. And so the roadmaps are really critical for rallying project teams around how we're actually going to deliver the outcome. And we focus those roadmaps around 3 key areas. So design optimization, products and materials, and on-site construction. And so in the design optimization area, it really included looking at different structural solutions. So core arrangements, we use things like parametric facade modeling to really optimize external shading requirements, particularly on the towers, so that we're only putting material where it was most needed. For products and materials, we really worked to hone in on what were the trade packages and the materials in particular that really drove the largest embodied carbon impact. So kind of recognized quite early on that it was a huge task and lots of materials and components. So we had to get quite razor sharp in terms of what we were going to focus on. So it wasn't so much to neglect other opportunities, and we certainly shopped around for lots of different opportunities through the process, but we still kind of had to keep our eye on the prize in terms of focusing on those big ticket items. So I'll speak a little bit more to that in the following slides. the final point just around on-site construction is really important, especially to get early engagement with on-site construction teams. The best efforts in design can really quickly be undone if those teams aren't appropriately engaged early. So you need to make sure that the solutions can be kind of managed through a time, cost, quality lens. And construction teams, I guess, also, they have a wealth of knowledge that can be tapped in early, particularly to unlock sort of innovation. So for example, again, with international towers, we looked at opportunities around how we could, taper core walls just through adjusting jump form systems as we were building. We looked at how we could reduce concrete use by using pigs to clear concrete pumping lines to reduce wastage. Looking at how we could even just simply relax early age strength on pours that occurred on a Thursday, for instance, because we had an additional day up our sleeves because people don't work on Sunday, for stripping formwork and still keeping to program. So there's simple things like that you can I guess through that engagement with on-site construction teams, you can sort of add that to your roadmap. It's important. So maybe on that point, I might just jump forward in terms of some insights into the process that we followed during the procurement stage. So we engaged, I guess, with key suppliers really early in the project, and we looked at opportunities to scale our purchasing by combining a number of buildings under the one contract. So we went out, for example, for a single supply contract for all of our reinforcing steel across the basement, or stage 1A of the basement, and the 3 commercial towers. So it allowed us to get scale. And we also did a similar thing with concrete supply, which was aggregated across the towers. So we cast the net pretty wide in terms of what potential low carbon product and material opportunities were there, but we really focused our early attention on concrete, steel and facade. So we also looked, I guess, floor finishes, access floors were a particular focus area for us too on commercial towers, a significant floor space and square meterage of that. And we also looked at, I guess, suspended ceilings, internal walls and floor finishes, and ceilings within residential context. And so one of the key engagement points is during sort of pre-qualification and tender briefing sessions with suppliers. And so it was really key for us to get in front of them early, so that we made it clear what our targets were and how they could work with us in order to achieve that. So if I take an example of when we let the facade package for the commercial towers, we set a 12-week competitive tender process with 3 different tenderers. But before we actually kicked that phase off, we engaged with them and said, this is what we're planning to do. We spoke to them about the sort of information that we would need in order to evaluate the embodied carbon of different design solutions from those suppliers. And some of the feedback from that is that we sort of went in early and asked for a lot. But in the end, we sort of paired that back to what was actually manageable and achievable within that 12-week period. So we got enough information to set the overall direction and understand who provided us with a better solution, but didn't kill everyone under the burden of, full-scale reporting and returnable schedules. So the other thing probably worth mentioning too is we did have a Barangaroo South innovation program, which again was quite instrumental in identifying and screening low carbon building products and opportunities, a lot of which we kind of looked at through the process. The other key thing that we did too was we developed general specification requirements for most major trades, but we also developed kind of those more highly specific clauses around the concrete, steel and facade trades. And we developed bespoke for each of those trades returnable schedules as well, so that we could actually tease out the information that we needed to support our embodied carbon analysis. So detailed information from facades to understand what's the quantum of aluminium and where's the aluminium coming from? How's it getting to us? What's the glass? You know, the other elements within the facade as well, from, you know, steel backpan to gaskets and all the other finishes that relate to facade. So quite detailed. So we went detailed in areas where we needed to in order to assure ourselves that we had the right kind of resolution on the numbers to make a decision. So the other thing, and this has got some parallels, I guess, with Lucy's hierarchy. We set up a supplier engagement questionnaire as well, alongside the returnable schedules and specifications. So this was more generally targeted across the majority of our supply tendering arrangements. And we asked suppliers to detail for us what they could do around dematerialization. So how could they achieve the same performance with their product, but with less material than what would commonly be used? So trying to remove any unnecessary materials. What could they do around low carbon material substitution or switching out with recycled content? We asked them what they could do around manufacturing and sourcing. So even looking upstream with their own suppliers, and how they might be able to encourage them or source lower carbon inputs into their final finished product they're delivering to us, and then how they were getting it to us. We asked them around logistics, what could they do around packaging, whether ways they could put things more on rail or in reusable stillages and things like that. And finally, we asked around carbon offsetting of unavoidable emissions. But I guess importantly too, part of the push there was also to drive some of our suppliers to actually invest in doing their own life cycle assessments, to actually preparing environmental product declarations. So we had a bit of success in terms of being able to sort of push the market in that space, and we were able to unlock quite a few great initiatives. You know, we've got access floor contractor actually considered a redesign of the pedestal head within that system, which, you know, resulted in some significant reductions in the amount of steel within that system. You know, the extrusions using facade shading elements. Again, we were able to, through, you know, wind tunnel testing, we were able to lightweight those, but shape them in a way that we didn't get vibration occurring from wind, and that vibration transfer onto the inside of the building. We were able to pilot ZEP cement at the time, which is now widely known as Invisia, to actually use that in some test panels within the precinct. And yeah, and like I said, we even had some certified carbon neutral products, which were a bit of a first for the Australian industry. So I'll just jump forward now in terms of what we have learnt. Or I probably should preference this also with what we're still learning. There's sort of many things that we're still working on improving and we're kind of leveraging on our projects globally. But for me, the kind of key lessons are really grouped around timing, education, keeping things simple and focused. And when I say focused, data-driven focus. So I guess everyone always says that it's really important to get in early, but finding ways to kind of bring suppliers and construction teams into the design process is important to get the best results. Also, you need to be able to balance, avoid sort of getting into the weeds too early in the concept stage. You need to be comfortable with some ambiguity. And I guess to some of the points that Lucy raised, you need to sort of set the right direction and then work to refine the detail as you move forward. And focus on, you know, structure and envelope that are critical to address early. Education's really important. You need to make sure that you're actually educated yourself and understand your supply chain, understand your suppliers' pain points, and understand how they can deliver low carbon for you, and where there may be constraints in them being able to deliver that for you. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And any progress is actually better than none at all. The other thing that we've learned too is you can write a beautiful specification, but it's really only as good as the person that's managing it. So again, you need to take the time to manage the people that are managing, to educate the people that are managing those trade packages so that they know what they're trying to, the targets that they're hitting and what they're managing to. I think the other thing too is there's a sort of a wide spectrum of understanding in terms of what embodied carbon is. That gap's closing, which is great, but we still need to recognise that we've got a fair way to go in that space, with everybody being on a level playing field and understanding what we're talking about. The other thing is we need obviously to keep it simple. It's really hard to do in such a complex area, but linking to existing processes and things that are familiar help get people comfortable. So we've found where we've been successful is where we've been able to kind of link within existing workflows and processes. And finally, use the data to keep you on task and focused. Recognise that it's not going to be perfect early, but you need to sort of work in sort of a funnel sense where you start with a very broad benchmarks, rules of thumbs, moving down to actual measurement and then verification at the end. So I'll probably leave it there. I think I'm probably over time. Happy to take questions and a bit later, and I'll throw back to Ross.
Thanks, Darryl. Only a minute. Did pretty well, really. Boy, you've raised some questions there. The thing that was front of mind for me is that what you're describing is obviously a highly vertically integrated design and procurement process, which traditional design, tendering, and contracting, particularly with emphasis on the nature of contracts, really drives against that. We might return to that a bit later, but what are you seeing in the UK in terms of anything around processes, vertical integration of process and supply chain management? Do you feel like there's some real progress happening there in terms of impact from supply chain management?
Yeah, I mean, Darryl, you said something about how this sort of gap is, or the range is closing in terms of breadth of knowledge on this. I think we're seeing the same. It's only going in one direction. We're having more and more contractors requiring their supply chain to provide EPDs for their products. Maybe not on every product and maybe not on every job yet, but it's only increasing. There's a woman up here called Jane who runs a blog around LCAs and EPDs and things, and she regularly updates it with the number of EPDs that have been created. So I checked in this morning, and so far we've up to 12,000 EPDs for different products around Europe, and that number has been going up exponentially for the last 10 years. I think 10 years ago it was down at about 1,000 or something. So it's it's all going in that direction. I spoke to a house builder recently who said that they're thinking that within a few years they're just going to mandate that if you don't have an EPD for your product, you can't sell products to them, which sounds pretty brutal right now, but with enough of a sort of advanced notice, that will just push things even further in this direction. So yeah, it's exciting. It's really good.